We begin in Georgia, where Governor Brian Kemp has signed an overhaul of state elections into law. The new law limits ballot drop boxes, makes it a misdemeanor to hand out food and beverages in voting lines, and requires a photo ID to vote absentee. But it does expand in-person early voting. At his first official news conference yesterday, President Biden said these new election bills were, quote, un-American and sick. He said he would do everything in his power to keep them from becoming law. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked if the administration has plans for executive action.
Like the late Congressman John Lewis said, there's nothing more precious than the right to vote and speak up. And the president certainly believes that. There are pieces of legislation, as you noted, but that he is watching closely, that he will be engaging with members of Congress on, including the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, to make it easier for all eligible Americans to vote, to have access to the ballot box, and to prevent attacks on the sacred right to vote.
For more on this, I want to bring in CBSN Washington reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. Hi, Caitlin. So tell us what restrictions this new Georgia voting law puts in place, and does it include any additions? Does it make voting easier in any way?
Hi, Tanya. Well, Georgia has been front and center for this heated voting rights debate. What made it into the bill and what was passed by the Republican governor last night includes limits to drop boxes. It says that you can't give out water or food to people waiting in line to vote. And remember, during the primaries especially, there were very, very long, hours-long lines to vote. It also requires a photo ID for absentee ballots. You have to put your license number on those ballots. That's in place of a signature check. And it also says that the state board of elections can intervene in local boards of elections, and that's something that voting rights experts are concerned about. But what did not make it into this bill are some of the more controversial things we had been covering heading into this. So what did not make it in is the elimination of absentee or no excuse absentee voting, and it doesn't restrict voting on Sundays. That was an earlier proposal that would have targeted Black Americans who voted in record numbers in the 2020 election. What it does do, it actually expands early voting. So it requires 2 Saturdays of early voting and gives counties the option to have early voting on 2 Sundays as well. So that's what's in the bill, that's what's not in the bill. But broadly speaking, this is an example of the ways in which Republicans at the state level have reacted to the 2020 election and have kind of seized on the message coming from the former president, the unfounded claims of voter fraud and a rigged election. That's really been driving a lot of the Republican support for some of these rollbacks to voting access. So that's what we saw in Georgia, a state that Biden won for the first time for Democrats in decades, a state that saw record turnout not only in the general election but in the subsequent runoff that delivered 2 victories to Democrats in the Senate, and saw record turnout among African American voters.
And so what does all of this mean for other states where lawmakers are trying to pass similar bills, Caitlin?
That's right. So the Brennan Center has calculated that there are over 250 bills in over 40 states aimed at curbing voting access. Not all of them are going to make it through. Georgia's an example of some of the proposals that didn't make it through, but a state like Iowa signed into law earlier this month restrictions or cutting back on voting hours for early voting and election day voting. That's already signed into law, but a couple states that we're watching for kind of similar proposals that potentially curb voting access are places like Texas, Florida, and Arizona. Arizona, of course, a state that Biden won for the first time for Democrats in a long time, but Texas and Florida are states that former President Trump won in the 2020 election. Florida especially is a state that has been running elections pretty well, given everything they've learned from that 2000 election. So you're seeing states where Republicans lost and are reacting, but you're also seeing efforts underway in states that Republicans won. And so this speaks to kind of what is driving this.
And Caitlin, as we mentioned, President Biden held his first official press conference yesterday. We got to talk to you about it then. Reporters spent a lot of the time asking about the surge of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. Here's what the president had to say about why we are seeing this surge now. Let's listen.
The reason they're coming is that it's the time they can travel with the least likelihood of dying on the way because of the heat in the desert, number one. Number two, they're coming because of the circumstances in country.
So, Caitlin, what did we learn yesterday about the Biden administration's plan to address these complicated and thorny issues at the border?
Complicated and thorny issues indeed, and the president said as much. They seem to be focused, according to the president yesterday, on addressing the root causes of migration. And of course, he has tasked Vice President Kamala Harris to lead on that effort. But there are remaining questions about, even if you are focused on addressing root causes, how does that solve the surge that they're seeing at the border right now and the overcrowding in these facilities that are not meant to house unaccompanied children. There are also questions related to what the president said yesterday. Yes, there are seasonal surges in migration that have happened over the decades, but there is also reporting, and from our own reporters who have been at the border, from migrants who are saying that they have heard about more lenient policies here in the United States, and that's why they are making that dangerous journey. The president also said there that this happens every year, a surge in migrants, but his own DHS secretary, Mayorkas, said that this is at a 20-year high, that the number of migrants they're encountering at the border is at a 20-year high. So that doesn't exactly square. This remains a complicated issue for this administration, given that they changed the policy early on in the administration, but you still have this emerging crisis at the border. In the meantime, Republicans are sending their own delegations down to look at facilities. The Democrats have sent delegations as well with the White House staff to look at these facilities as well, but there still remains a question of media access that has not been granted into some of these facilities. The president said yesterday that he's committed to providing that access, but wouldn't say when, and still hasn't said when.
Yeah, it seems to be sort of shooting the administration in the foot a little bit. Just open it up, make it transparent. It seems to be an easy answer there, but of course, it's a complicated situation. Caitlin, President Biden also said that his next major initiative will be infrastructure. What do you think we could see from this plan?
That's right. They're proposing a $3 trillion package that is likely to be divided in two parts. One, to address physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, and even climate change, which of course is related to infrastructure. But there are also is likely to be a section dedicated to some domestic priorities, expanding access to universal pre-K, for example, and other other issues related to domestic priorities. The big question here is the price tag and how it will be paid for. The Biden administration has said that they want to pay for this or help pay for this by increasing taxes on people who earn more than $400,000 annually. However, Republicans are taking big issue with anything that's considered a tax increase. And so can they get the votes for something like this, given the price tag and the proposed pay-fors? And so that remains a question of, do they try to still get bipartisan support or go through the reconciliation process that they used for the COVID relief package that would just require majority support? So we'll see how things shake out. The president is supposed to go to Pittsburgh next week to unveil more details about this proposal. He said yesterday this is the next top priority for this administration.
Moving right along. All right. Well, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.